So I just had a great conversation with my therapist that I have to see in order to get my medication from my physician. I have to go see this therapist because this physician is like, I don't know what that medicine is. I don't know if you should be taking it. Can you at least see someone? So I'm just, paying extra money to go have someone say like, yeah, that's fine. So that this doctor feels comfortable, because they got to cover their own ass. If when they're not spending their 3 minutes of FaceTime with you and coming up with new billing codes, doctors are spending their time primarily covering their asses. So that's great. Anyway, back to the therapist. So I'm talking to her and she's like, how's work going? And I'm like, oh, we just had to do this thing at work where we had to change all the references of the word master to something else because master is in reference to slavery and all uses of the word master. Like when I have my master's degree in English, I'm referring to the use of the word master only in that one definition that is pertaining to slavery, right? And she's like, don't you see how it can be offensive to some people? I was like, okay, well, then it makes me feel unsafe at work because, if people can look at a word that has multiple definitions and only see it in one way, can only see it when it comes to black and white American slavery, not slavery in general, because slavery existed everywhere and they had masters and slaves all over there. They're seeing it only in context of American racial slavery. If they look at a word that has several definitions and is still in use in all those definitions and can only see slavery, American racialized slavery, when they see that word, then they're racist, right? How can they look at me, white skin, right? I'm from the master class, right? They have to look at me and think that guy's a slave owner because they can't tell the difference. They can't interpret things with different contexts. They have to look at me and make distinctions about me like white guy, fucking evil. He's a slave owner because that's what I know. The history book said slave owners were white. White people, slave owners. So they have to be looking at me if their brain is that simple, right? And she did not like that at all. She didn't like me calling that point of view simple. And she was like, well, you, as a white male have certain privileges. Don't you think it's right to give voice, standard argument or whatever? I was like, okay, who decides what's privileged? Who decides that? And she's like, well, it's different for everyone. And I was like, okay, am I qualified to decide what's privileged? She's like, no. And I was like, well, then who else is? No one. And she said, well, I am. I've been trained in it. And she kept saying, you as a white male have certain privileges. And I destroyed her. It was embarrassing. I brought up the jail thing. I was like, okay, well, how do we, define, privilege? How do we define oppression? How do we figure this out, right? Typically, it's based on socioeconomics. And she's like, well, there are other factors. I was like, yeah. But that's been the main one up until about 2015 or so, is socioeconomic status. So let's take a look at that. And I'm like, me as a white person, I'm outperformed by Asians, Middle Easterners, and Jews. Do I have a right to punch up at them? And she's like, no, you don't have to do it. I was like, yeah, but you're saying it's the moral course of action. You're saying that it's justice for me to punch up at Asians, Middle Easterners, and Jews, right? Like, I would be dishonorable if I did not take that justice seriously. So let's not fucking go there, all right? And she kept pressing it. She's like, well, is it so offensive to you? Do you think racism exists? And I was like, well, yeah, but, how are we going to deal with that? What's the solution? What's your solution here? And she's like, well, you as a white male have these privileges and, you're more privileged than I am as a woman. I was like, let's check yourself on that one. What are the facts? And I was like, how many majors in college are dominated by women? And she's like, I don't know, probably none. I was like, try half. Why isn't that being Title IX, right? If it's about equality, because I was like, this isn't about equality, this is about power, all right? And she's like, no, it's not about power, it's about equality. And I was like, okay, if there's so many majors that, and I brought up 60% of college enrollees are women and 40% are male. Why aren't we Title IXing this? Why isn't this an equality subject? Why aren't we trying to bring up male enrollment? She's like, well, you're privileged in other ways because you're a white male. I'm like, so you can make that assumption about me, Privilege is intersectional, and you have knowledge of all the ways in which I'm privileged. All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at jail. So, how come men get 60% longer sentences than women do? How come 97% of the prison population is male? And she was like, well, that's the judges. The judges are deciding the outcomes for that, and men commit more crime. I was like, oh. And she's like, and you have privilege because more men in jail are black than are white. I was like, oh, so that's oppression when more black men wind up in jail, right? So they don't have privilege in that situation. Let's be very clear about this. Oh, that's correct? Yes? Okay. So how come there are more men in jail than women? And she was like, well, men commit more crime. And I was like, so maybe there are more black men in jail than white men because black people commit more crime. And she's like, no, that's not true at all. And she's like, where are you getting these statistics? These are from like 20 years ago. And I was like, try 2019. And the study on sentencing was done in 2016 by a woman at the University of Michigan. And she would not let it go. She was like, I'm the one who's qualified to make decisions about what's privileged because I've been trained on it and I know these things, and you as a white male have so many privileges. And at that point, I almost lost it. I was almost like, you know what? If you can't view me as a human being and you have to judge me based on my class characteristics, my immutable class characteristics, and I'm coming to you for help, and you're like, well, he's a white male. Those are the things you know about me. And that tells you stuff. You're like, because he's a white male, XYZ. If I'm coming to you for therapy, for help, and that's your position, fuck you very much. Peace out, right? I almost said that, but instead I was like, oh, my doctor wants to talk to you about the current prescription that I have. Completely changed the subject because I almost lost my shit. But all right, so she's young and she's super arrogant and she does this stuff all the time. She thinks she knows more than doctors and whatever. She's very not humble, I guess, when it comes to her knowledge, even though she's a social worker. But apparently the training that she got on privilege makes her a judge of people. She knows because she had training on privilege. So she's the one who can say, what galactic social justice looks like, what that cosmic justice looks like. I'm blown away by that. I can't believe someone would come out of school thinking that shit about people. That's not good. That's really not good because she's probably not alone. Like, this is probably the standard kit for coming out of college with a master's in social work that you can speak on people's behalves before they tell you their story, right? You're like, oh, because you're a white male, I know that you have these privileges. And that's not a good way to approach therapy. There's an extremely poor way to provide someone with effective care.